We are going to start a very important plenary session. Uh, it's on restoring stability and economic landscape in Bangladesh, navigating reform agenda. Uh, Many of you know that. I'm saying many of you because there are some foreign participants. But I am quite sure that the participants from Bangladesh, you know that there are two important committees were formed uh, after the mass uprising on 5th August, and then the interim government which took over the power on 8th of August. So the first one was the White Paper Committee, and the second one was the task force uh, on the re-strategizing the economy and mobilizing resources for equitable and sustainable development. So task force has a much longer title. Uh, so the whole objective of this session is that we are very grateful that to the distinguished panelists that we have been able to have here uh, distinguished members from these two committees. While I'm quite sure the panelists, when they will speak, they will talk about the kind of findings from the research or the exercise during this while preparing these two reports. Also, at the same time, they will also talk about some of the current challenges and the future direction of the economy. Um, so we have from the task force Dr. K.S. Murshid, uh, and he will talk about roughly, but as I said that he will also cover some other issues, some of the major reform agendas from the task force report and implementation challenges. Then we also have Dr. Jahid Hussain. He will talk about macroeconomic challenges and how the economy can establish a sustained growth path. Then we have Professor Mustafizur Rahman. Both Dr. Jahid Hussain and Professor Mustafizur Rahman, they are the members of the White Paper Committee. So Professor Mustafizur Rahman, he'll be talking on the challenges related to the external sector, and probably he will touch upon the LDC graduation issues and some of the other issues, because one of the important chapters on the white paper was the illicit money transfer, who he authored, which was authored by him. So that particular chapter, he can also talk about that also. And I'm quite sure some of the students who, if you had a chance of reading that white paper report, probably you can also ask some questions. We also have Professor Sharmin Nilormi. I can't see her now yet. Probably she's on the way, but I'm quite sure she'll be joining. She was also a member of White Paper Committee, and she's supposed to talk on challenges related to human capital formation and how Bangladesh can make the best use of the demographic dividend. Then we have Dr. Rumana Haq, Professor, Department of Economics, Dhaka University. She was the member of the task force, and she'll be talking about the health sector and some of the related issues. I will act as a moderator. Actually, I was not supposed to moderate this session. The whole idea was to have Dr. Devapriya Bhattacharya to moderate this session, who was the chair of the White Paper Committee, but he is not in Dhaka at this moment. So that's why he was not available. The only reason I can tell you why I'm moderating this session is that I was the member of both these committees, probably the only member of both these committees. So I had a kind of perspective on what is there on the white paper and what is there on the task force. So broadly, I can tell you that white paper dealt with some of the very irregularities, what happened in the past regimes, and especially what was the state of the economy. So especially looking at towards the almost end of 2024, just to create some benchmark, especially related to the macroeconomy, social sector, external sector, labor market, and various other areas. So that was the whole objective. So that's why in the white paper report, committee report, though there are some suggestions related to the reform, but as we members of the white paper committee, we did not really get into much nitty-gritty of the reform agenda. So that was not the major objective of that exercise. So if you have gone through that report, probably you have looked into that. That perspective is there, very much there. But what I think, while as the member of the task force again, I thought that where the white paper left its work, the task force actually took over from there. It's my understanding. My other white task force members can differ with me. But then task force went into the very deep dive into some of the very important reform issues in Bangladesh. Starting from again macro and structural issues, export diversification, industrial strategy, to labor market, to human capital formation, education, health, and energy, and various other areas. So I can see that these two reports actually complement each other. That's why I think this session is extremely important here, where you will hear from I'm telling the audience that you will hear from the very eminent members of these two committees. They will speak on, some of these very important issues or the reform issues what Bangladesh is currently confronting. So with this, the modality is something like that, each speaker will get around 15 minutes. I know that 3 of them are using PowerPoint, but 2 other members, they have power and points, but they are not using PowerPoints. So I may not have both, but I will try to kind of, act as a kind of connector, as I was trying to act as a connector of both these two committees at some point of time. So with this, may I request Dr. K.S. Morshed, he is the former Director General, Bangladesh Institute of Development Studies, to Murshid Bhai to kindly take over the mic. And yes, you can come here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Salim, and thank you, Sanem, for giving me this occasion to speak before this audience. I've been following this conference online, but this is the first time I'm physically here during this particular conference. So basically, I would have wanted to hear more about the white paper because structurally what has happened is the two exercises went in parallel. But, and that's because of various circumstances. If it were to be organized more productively, then the white paper should have come first and the task force should have come later on. But anyway, since we went in parallel, we didn't quite really know who was doing what. Although Salim was very good at trying to bridge the gap, but that's not the same thing exactly. But anyway, so first of all, we are talking about regaining stability. Now, the circumstances in which we found ourselves in September was that we were in some kind of a deep crisis. And this crisis was actually the culmination of a number of crises that preceded it since 2020. And we all know about that. And so by September, that was the last straw on the camel's back, essentially. And we were basically looking to a short-term future which was near chaotic, if not actually chaotic. And so the first question that I would really ask is, do we need reforms? Because if we remember our development narrative, at least until 2020, was that we've always been asking about reforms, talking about reforms, saying that these are extremely important, but nevertheless, the economy kept on gaining momentum, diversifying, and producing good GDP growth rates. The macroeconomic situation was stable. The reserves were comfortable, inflation was under control, and so on and so forth. So there was no urgency for the politicians to say, look, why do we need reforms? Although the economists were saying you do need reforms, this can't continue indefinitely. But the policymakers and the politicians did not feel the heat. And while we predicted that this can't go on forever, and that to achieve future development and development targets, we need to actually engage in reforms, this didn't happen. And so maybe part of the reason why we are in a crisis today is because we did not actually undertake the reforms that we ought to have, particularly in the macro field. Now, because we got used to a stable macro economy for a long time. And so when the moment of truth came, we just, So first of all, what should we do? Now, in terms of the task force guidelines, we knew that we had a short time horizon because we didn't think the interim government would last beyond 2 years. We see that it's going to be less than that. So if we wanted to achieve anything, it would have to be within this time period. At least some reform measures needed to be taken within the duration of the interim government, because this is the only government that would provide you with the political economic space to actually carry on some of the reforms which for 50 years have been ignored. And we can kind of guess what those reasons were. So given this short frame, we had to think about, okay, so what would be reasonable, pragmatic? What are some of the things that we could do that might actually be sustainable, that might actually be able to generate enough dynamics that would then be continued over into the next regime, whichever that may be. So those were sort of our brave thoughts, I must say, because while we thought that during the initial few weeks that there was this political space, right now, with hindsight, I can say that those spaces have been, again, filled up. There is no longer the vacuum. The oligarchs may have left, but the criminal capitalists are still here. The criminals are here, and they are actually doing what they always do. They have occupied all these very, very important critical spaces. And therefore, the work of any reforms would be that much more difficult. So this is the context. Nevertheless, we came up with a number of suggestions and recommendations, but in my mind, I think the most important is the financial sector, because that is really where the heart of the economy is. And unless we are able to regain stability in our macroeconomic situation and bring the financial sector back into its senses, we will not progress very, very far in terms of regaining stability. So that's where, but in the meantime, we have already taken some measures. The Bangladesh Bank has adopted measures, which is, I think, we are headed in the right direction. But there are lots of things that can be done. Just to give you a couple of examples, one of the things that I learned while when I was sitting as an independent director in a bank is that the directors don't invest their own money. None of the bank directors invest their own money in the bank. So they have really nothing to gain, nothing to lose if the bank fails, because they've already made their money by their collusive activities. Second thing, the rating systems are deeply flawed. The credit rating systems, আমরা যেভাবে ব্যাংকগুলোকে রেটিং করি, that is deeply flawed. The tier 1, tier 2 categorization is deeply flawed. So we are actually functioning in a make-believe world where we are producing documentation which are very, very poor, do not reflect any reality. And on the basis of that, we are lending millions and millions of dollars. So this kind of a situation, the financial system cannot perform very well. And then on top of that, when we introduced privatization in the banking sector, we felt that a competitive banking sector in the hands of the private sector would do very well, would perform very well. It did not happen. Now, this is a very important lesson to learn, because we always talk about the free market and competition, but we forget about the fact that the free market can be easily, or perhaps not that easily, can become sabotaged. This is what has happened. Now, we have to come out of that. And the only way of doing that is getting the Bangladesh Bank to do its job properly, independently. And we have to do something about the board of these banks, because even now I think there are serious problems with the way the boards are put together and how they perform. And in the meantime, we have in our hands an acute crisis where 6, 7, 8 banks are in deep trouble. Now, the second most important thing, I think, is the regulatory environment. Now, particularly when we talk of economic governance, I think our problems are really severe, because we have a problem of confidence in the market, we have a problem of poor enabling conditions for investment. And although the problems are very complex, relates to energy, infrastructure, governance, all these issues, but there are also some things that can be more easily done. You can actually change the regulatory regime almost overnight if you want to. So in a way, in terms of operations, it is not too difficult to change the regulatory regime. It might be very difficult to change your, for example, energy supply regime. Because that's a different ballgame. It takes time to explore for gas, so on and so forth. But some things can be done quickly, especially when you're talking about policy reforms. Those can be done very quickly. But the reason why we don't do it, again, this is a basic question. Why haven't we done it in 50 years? Again, the same thing. We have opposition from vested interest groups. So now is the time to do it. And in our task force, we have recommended the establishment of a regulatory reform commission that would actually look at all the regulations that exist. Many of those are superfluous. Many of those need to be just expunged. And maybe you also need some additional ones. So this has to be systematically dealt with, and not on a case-by-case basis, because somebody comes and says, do something about this particular regulation. That is the way we have worked so far. Time has now come to do it at a more organized level. I don't know how many more minutes I have, because 5 minutes, thank you. Okay. One thing that I personally strongly believe is that in order to regain stability, we have to really take care of our agricultural markets. Because no matter how much effort you put into reforming your the financial sector and rebalancing your interest rate or exchange rates, or trying to deploy monetary policy for inflation control, the reality is that unless we are able to maintain a smooth flow of basic foods and necessities, we cannot contain inflation, because it's essentially supply-driven. So the two problems with that, one is we have to diversify our agricultural production, and secondly, because we depend, and this dependence has aggravated things over the years, it depends so much on imported food and imported food items that this is making it very, very difficult for us to actually control inflation when the root of the problem is external. Now, in our case, it was not all external, because if you have an exchange rate that suddenly drops 40%, then obviously you would be in a crisis where you have to depend on everything for imports, whether it's energy, whether it's food, and so on and so forth. So we have recommended that in the short term, if we think of keeping or building reserves for not just for food that we already do, for rice that we already do, but also for diesel and energy, for fertilizer, and some essential items, maybe even like edible oil. Because otherwise, there is no chance that we can stabilize the market, because there's absolutely no way that you can do it through private sector operations. I'll not go into the details of why that is the case, but in the short term, that seems to be the only alternative. Longer term, of course, we will have to bring about import substitution in agriculture. In the task force report, we have pointed to some areas where we could actually obtain a lot of benefits. There are potentials and opportunities that can be exploited. But that essentially depends on technology and dissemination of technology, of knowledge and information, and also behavior change. So one of the things that we have argued for in terms of new institutions is also a center or a research center for social and behavioral change communication. Because we see that this is being practiced in a very fragmented and ad hoc manner by different departments, different ministries. But the need for this, at least for us in the task force, was so obvious. And we wondered why such a thing was never attempted. And nobody even thinks of this kind of a mechanism to try and change our behavior in terms of making it much more amenable to growth and development and sustainability. this is needed in every direction, whether it's climate, whether it's agriculture, whether it's new innovation, whether it's governance, you need this. So this is something new. We have also talked about how to improve governance. And here, this is a subject that everybody, of course, talks about, but we basically figured that instead of trying to draw up major complex plans to improve governance, which we have been trying for many years, let us just be practical and commonsensical about this. Let us just pick some institutions that we think need to be changed. It could be the NBR, could be a public hospital, could be Bangladesh Bima. Just take 2, 3, 4, whatever. I mean, we have just given some examples, but it can be, you can take any other example. Let's start the job. Let's start by changing the management. Let's start by changing the professional leadership. Let's build in some kind of a monitoring and evaluation system. Let us build in some kind of a user feedback mechanism, preferably online, can be even pen and paper. And let us have citizens and youth watchdogs, voluntary preferably, who would be, their job will be to see whether the commitments that have been made are being adopted and followed. Okay. And so those are the sorts of things that we've tried to suggest. But the important thing is not to take our suggestions as being the last word, but to at least use these to begin a new conversation. And in that process, I think we can move forward. We will have to move forward, but business as usual is not going to work. We do need to now think more pragmatically. Very important, I think, and I would urge the current interim government to take up some of these ideas, because one promise has already been made, which is that every ministry has been asked to take up at least one recommendation. Maybe they haven't yet done this, as far as I can understand. I have not heard of any ministry saying that this is one recommendation that we're going to undertake. Maybe all of us together can pressure these ministries. Please take one recommendation. Don't have to take ours, take from CPD, take from SANEM, take from whoever you want. Take one damn recommendation. Let's get some results. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Okay, no? Thank you. Thank you, Murshid Bhai. Actually, Dr. Mukesh Murshid was the head of the task force committee, and we benefited quite a lot from his insight while preparing his report. Two things I just want to add. While we had these discussions in the task force, we were discussing about what Murshid Bhai was, towards the end he was mentioning, identify some of the projects, and we were talking about low-hanging projects or low-hanging fruits. But we struggle to identify which are the low-hanging. Even whether traffic management in Dhaka, is it low-hanging? It should be low-hanging, but it appears that probably one of the most difficult tasks in the world. How do you do that? So I think that's something is also very important. The second point is that what Murshid Bhai towards the end he mentioned, that's extremely important. We talk about the supply side perspective of the institutional reform, like what he was mentioning about ministries taking up reform, government taking up reform, but he also talked about the demand side as well. Unless we citizens put the right kind of pressure or work as a pressure group, that will not really work. So I request, I know that many students are here, request to all of you, kindly read these two reports, both the white paper report and the task force. And why don't you start, initiate the discussion amongst yourselves and also with important stakeholders whom you think critical to discuss on these very critical economic issues and reform issues in Bangladesh. So it's not just don't leave this to the economists, don't leave this to the government, because you are now, July and August movement showed that you are bringing up the changes in Bangladesh. But why don't you now focus on these very real and critical issues? I think this is very important, because unless you read these two reports and try to understand and try to convey the message and work as a pressure group, I don't think our system will change. Okay, with this now, let me invite Dr. Jahid Hussain. He was a very distinguished member of the White Paper Committee. He was a former lead economist of World Bank. Dr. Jahid bhai, you have a presentation.
Full. Thank you, Salim and Sanem. One of the key findings of the white paper was that Bangladesh is already in a low middle income trap. So in this slide, I try to show some of the faces of the low middle income trap. One is in the investment and export intensity of the economy. And you can notice that investment rate has been stagnating, lately slightly even declining. Same goes for export, but perhaps in a more forceful way, that the export GDP ratio was stagnant for a while and then started to decline. So that's one face of the trap. Then if you look at the chart on inflation, which relates current inflation with past inflation, there also you see a very strong correlation between inflation today and inflation yesterday. That was not always the case. If you look at the bottom corner of the chart, those are all dots concentrated. There was no relation when inflation was low. But as inflation started to accelerate, then it became also more dependent on past inflation. So that's the inflation trap that we are stuck in. Then the foreign exchange reserves of the country, which were rising rapidly for a while. I have data from September 19, and then reached a peak and since then has been declining. And now we are at a low, stable level of reserves. And then the banking sector, the volume of distressed assets have been rising. And as you can see, the middle portion of the bar, which is the amount of rescheduled loans, that has also been growing. So this is in the banking jargon known as evergreening of loans. The propensity to evergreen has increased over time. And then the total public debt. And we in the white paper have not used the conventional metric, which is the debt GDP ratio. And we have made arguments there why that is a misleading indicator in the context of Bangladesh. So we used other indicators, particularly for external debt, the ratio of external debt to foreign exchange earnings, and then for domestic debt, the ratio to domestic revenues. And both have been rising. So that's the sign of debt trap that's emerging. So this is what the whole collection of these is what we mean by the middle income trap. So the next question is, okay, what is the current government doing about it? So in the current macro policies, we have on the monetary and fiscal side, the stance is tight money and containment of deficit. Tight money we have seen in the form of increased policy rate to 10%. Recently they decided to keep it unchanged. And also, government is borrowing from the banking system and repaying Bangladesh Bank. So the stock of high-powered money is decreasing. Then we have also seen several tax cuts for some essential items. But at the same time, we also saw recently proposed increases in VAT, which were kind of conflicting measures. And then there are also initiatives to cut ADP, Annual Development Program, expenditures. On the exchange rate side, the current policy stance seems to me is gripped by the fear of volatility. And so there is a disconnect between what these circulars that were issued in December say about the exchange rate regime and what the actual exchange rate system is on the ground in terms of the behavior of the regulator. And the regulator currently is very vocal about the alleged manipulation of the foreign exchange market by the aggregators. So there is very strong market policing of dollar purchases from the aggregators. So we really don't have a managed flow system yet. We are still in a crawling peg system. On banking sector, what the government is currently doing is firefighting, safeguarding, strengthening the safeguards and preparing for restructuring of the banks. So in the firefighting, it's basically crisis management through emergency liquidity assistance. Then there is a new circular which has tightened the recognition criteria for non-performing loans and for provisioning against that loans. And that will become effective from next April. And then there is also another circular which requires banks to report on who the ultimate beneficiary owners of the banks are. And that was a big problem in our banking system, as you all know. Then there is currently an asset quality review going on of 6 banks. And there is work going on 3 new laws. One is called the Banking Resolution Ordinance. The abbreviation is interesting. It's BRO, the Gen Z term. So then we have the Deposit Protection Ordinance and Distressed Asset Management Ordinance. These are works in progress, and these will be essential for restructuring, for making a decision on what to do with what type of bank based on the results of the asset quality review. And then in the energy and power sector, we have the focus currently is, unlike the previous case, where the emphasis was on price increases, here to reduce subsidy in the energy sector, which is a big amount, Taka 42,000 crore, the focus is on cost reduction and competition. So in cost reduction, recently government has decided to reduce the charges they used to pay to the HFO-based power plants for importing fuel. There was a 9% charge that was paid to the HFO plants, which has been reduced to 5%. And then there is also freight reduction. Of course, the Bangladesh International Independent Power Producer Association is very unhappy about this reduction, so we don't know what ultimately will happen. But this has already been done, and the government is also trying to renegotiate power tariffs with the independent power producers. Then the electricity and gas pricing decision, which was taken away from the Bangladesh Energy and Regulatory Commission, that has now been returned to BARC, so that any proposal to increase prices will have to go through a public hearing. So the consumers will have a voice in ultimately deciding when and how much to change the prices. And then the most problematic element in the power sector was this quick enhancement of electricity and energy supply, which indemnified all kinds of non-competitive procurement of power plants. That has been completely repealed. And as a result, some of the about 34 letters of intent which were issued to solar power producers, these have been scrapped. These were very overpriced letter of intent that were issued. These have been scrapped, but there are some legal complications that have arisen which will have to be settled, but I personally think that was a step in the right direction. So these are the things that the interim government has done. Now, of course, recently we have also seen discussions about the state of the IMF program, so I thought I should have something to say on this. Now, it is clear that the program has run into some kind of a glitch, which is probably more complicated than the computer one you had. And the official narrative that we have been given is that this was a joint decision that, we were supposed to get the fourth disbursement in the IMF meeting in February, then that was deferred to March. Initially, the February was saying that deferral was because of the fire in California, which is a very strange explanation. And then the March deferment was said there's too much snow was falling in DC. So but the meeting was still held. So the official explanation is that we jointly decided to defer the disbursement and combine the fourth and fifth in one go in June. And I hear the sounds of complacence from the establishment that, look, there is enough forex supply, there is no problem, so we don't need the money, there is no urgency. That's the official Ministry of Finance statement. And then, but my sense is perhaps there are some disagreements on the nuts and bolts of the structural benchmarks, they call the policy actions that were needed before the proposal goes to the board. I am sure there are some disagreements on the nuts and bolts of that, and that remains to be worked out. Now, one thing I want to make clear that you could ask, the IMF money, $670 million, 2 disbursements, the $1.2 billion, it's not that big an amount. It's a big amount, but it's not that big. But I think the program discontinuity has consequences beyond just the IMF money. So it not only affects the IMF money, but also money particularly given in the form of budget support from the World Bank. Certainly if the IMF money doesn't go, World Bank money won't go, the budget support money, that's for sure. ADB money, AIIB money, the cash supports could also face some difficulties in terms of convincing their management that why are you going ahead when IMF is stuck. So that's one, the impact on all other financial flows that a discontinuity would have, but also it affects the risk perceptions, particularly the ratings of the Moody's and S&P and Fitch. And then it has direct impact on the financing costs, particularly trade financing costs, where the rates on UPAS, LC confirmation fees, and the relationships with the correspondent banks, those will be adversely affected. And of course, it would have helped if there was full transparency about what kind of disagreements has led to this pause in the disbursement. Who is to be blamed for this? Well, it takes two to tango, So I think the combination of the fund's unyieldingness and the government's complacence can stall reforms. And here I would like to mention one thing that you, the student of economics, you have studied the law of diminishing marginal returns. And here I think we should have a law of diminishing marginal blame, because the more distant you get from the past, the less you can blame the past for your own failures. So if the government is not able to deliver, it has to take responsibility. It cannot say it all happened before August 5. Right? So that's the law of diminishing marginal blame, which I think the policymakers must keep in mind. And then let me come to the task force report. What the white paper did is, what is the current state of the economy? What the task force was saying, what needs to change? And they have made a number of recommendations. probably, if you count them all the chapters, it will exceed 1,000. But in the first introductory chapter, in fact, before the introductory chapter, they have highlighted recommendation 34, which has many one-stop shops, special economic zones, FDI in health, Dhaka Hut, regulatory, some very specific things that need to change. And then this single operator bus franchise, and Selim was saying that is the urban management thing is a low-hanging fruit. Amader to kathal gacho ekta low-hanging fruit naki eta aam gach low-hanging fruit. The heights vary, right? So, and we saw the experience recently with the bus operator thing, that it is indeed very difficult. So what we should be expecting, that the task force has given its report, the interim government will be presenting its first and probably the only budget soon in June, and we expect that what footprints of the task force will be in the budget, the structural reform they propose with the budget, not just revenue, expenditure, and financing, but also the other reforms. The task force report specifies very well the what part of the reform, what to do. Maybe all of that we will not agree. I mean, it will be very strange if all economists agree on everything. I mean, that means something is wrong there, right? So the how part is to be decided by the doers. It's not the job of the task force to say how to do it. It's the job of the ministries to pick up a reform recommendation and then figure out how this can be done. That's the detailed nitty-gritty part of it. Now, the billion-dollar question here is, will there be political ownership of the task force report? And then beyond the budget, what we expect that in the election manifestos that soon will come up, we would hope there would be some footprints of the task force report if they think economic reform is important. Now, the question is, does the task force or the white paper has any responsibility on this? Who should engage? I mean, if the political parties don't engage with us, should we go forward? I think that's probably not the right idea there. I think the point on demand for reforms is important. We are supply driving the reforms if there is no demand. So I think if the demand for engagement comes from the political parties, that we will always be ready. I'm sure Murshid Bhai will always be ready to go and explain what they mean by these reforms. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jahid Bhai. Now I request Professor Mustafizur Rahman, another member of the White Paper Committee. He's a distinguished fellow of Center for Policy Dialogue. Sir, please.
Good afternoon. Selim, feeling powerless without PowerPoints, but I will try. I was asked to discuss some of the critical issues related to the external sector, particularly in view of Bangladesh's LDC graduation. But let me begin by telling that as we approached 5th of August, external sector was under a lot of pressure. The pressure was on various fronts. One, of course, was the data. As you know, the export data was reduced from $52 billion to $44 billion because we were double counting. Okay, the deemed export that went to the export processing zone was double counted. It was counted once it was going to the export processing zone as a deemed export, and then it was once again counted as we exported the final product. So that had to be corrected, and it was corrected. So that is one thing. The other is, as Zahid Bhai also mentioned, that the degree of openness of Bangladesh economy, which was in about 2015, it was about 44%, meaning export plus import of goods and services divided by the GDP. and it came down to about 30%. So Bangladesh economy's integration with the global economy, which was one of our major strengths, I think was weakening also. And that was also manifested when our reserves came down from $48 billion to $24 billion, according to IMF, $20 billion. The BDT depreciated by about 35% from 86 taka to 122 taka now. So external sector has been experiencing a lot of challenges, I would say. Both the task force report and the white paper mentioned about the major constraints facing the external sector, particularly the export sector. In our report, in the task force, and as Salim mentioned, that I wrote the chapter on the illicit financial outflows. About 77% of the illicit financial outflow was through trade mispricing. You over-invoice when you are importing and you under-invoice when you are exporting. So we used the Global Financial Integrity Report methodology in order to come to that figure, which is now floating. But the fact remains that trade-related mispricing is a major issue which has to be addressed. Now that the 5th of August happened and the Hundi Howla market is not operating as it was operating before that time. And we are seeing its reflection also in the remittance flows, which increased by about $7 billion in 2024 compared to 2023. So this is also one of the indicators. So I think, first of all, data, second of all, trade-related mispricing. These are the two challenges, I think, which we will have to correct. Now, with regard to the exports, we always talk about export diversification, and which is very true. But whenever this issue comes up, I think about intra-RMG export diversification possibilities is also one area which we don't talk about. You see, we have been able to put our footprints in the global market of a commodity whose total global market size is about $750 billion. And we are just only 6% of that market. So within the ready-made garments, 75% of our export is cotton-based. If you look at the global market, 75% of the market is man-made synthetic fiber, polyester, etc., non-cotton. So I think within the ready-made garments, there are enormous opportunities of export diversification. And there, FDI could have played a very important role. But our myopic policies, even a few years back, investment, FDI in ready-made garments outside of the EPZ, in domestic tariff area, was not allowed. Our BGMA and our exporters and some of our policymakers, they didn't allow this. But for the non-cotton part of the apparels, you need a lot of investment. And there, the FDI could have been very crucial. So this is one thing. The other is that, you see, we say that 21st century is Asian century, which is true. India, China, East Asia. But if you look at our exports to these regions, South Asia, Southeast Asia, ASEAN, it's only 11% of our total export. So here, the policies that we should have pursued, for example, having free trade agreements, comprehensive partnership agreements, economic and technical cooperation agreements, we didn't go for that because this would have been on a non-reciprocity basis, okay? You have to give something in order to get something. So we didn't go the hard way. So that is one of the major problems that will be coming in the context of the LDC graduation. You see, just visualize a scenario where Bangladesh will have to pay 10% duty in some of the markets, and Vietnam, which is now paying, and they will not have to pay because they have a free trade agreement, for example, with the European Union. So the difference will be, to that extent, 20%, okay? So these are hard choices which our policymakers haven't been able to take or didn't want to take, but it will come. In the context of export diversification, I think services trade, this hasn't really drawn the attention that it should have. You see, e-commerce, F-commerce, business process outsourcing, freelancing, these are major part of the global trade, but we are not giving enough attention. For example, if you want to have a freelancing, you should have a PayPal. We don't allow it. So these are the areas where the central bank, monetary authorities, the policymakers will have to give a lot of attention to as we go forward. FDI, I think the triangulation of transport connectivity, trade connectivity, and investment connectivity, that is the way to go forward. In our neighborhood, you see, China imports about $2,800 billion. Our export is less than $1 billion. India imports $730 billion. Our export is less than $2 billion. So these countries are importing, but we are not producing the products which they are importing, in order to export to these markets. So there, I think, foreign direct investment and policies to encourage and stimulate foreign direct investment is very important. The last government set up a number of special economic zones, but we were always telling, don't go for 100 special economic zones. Go for 5 and have them up and running. And then the others can follow. So that's what the BIDA is now doing. They have identified 5, and they will go and give the one-stop service, the services that were envisaged under the One-Stop Service Act of 2018. But then you can only give one-stop service if you have the services, If you don't have gas, how do you give the one-stop service? It will become the full-stop service. So these are the areas where we will need to focus on. LDC graduation. Now, Bangladesh is one of the very few least developed countries which were able to take advantage of the preferences, because all exports originating from the LDCs, or almost all of them, for all of the products, was zero tariff. So we have been able to take advantage of that. If you take the 12 LDCs which are slated for graduation in the next years, because of the preference erosion, the total losses of these 12 countries, 12 LDCs, 90% of it will fall on Bangladesh. We have been able to take the most advantages, and we will be the most to suffer. So period. So how do you really prepare yourself for post-LDC graduation period? Now in our country, the last government, as you can see, it was trying to reduce the incentives, export incentives, which we will not be permitted to give beyond 2026 November. They wanted to bring down the export incentive from 4 to 3 to 2, and then in 2026 to 0. But our exporters said that jobe hobe tobe hobe. We don't want to have any adjustment period, keep it. So it is still there, but our economy will have to adjust to the post-LDC scenario which is coming, where we will not have preferences, where we will not have TRIPS derogation, which allows our pharmaceutical sector to produce without buying licenses and patents. So all these regimes are going to change, okay? So now, of course, European Union, Canada, and some of the other countries, China recently, they have agreed that they will extend it for another 3 years, but maybe 2029, so okay. But I hear often that some of our exporters are arguing for deferment of LDC graduation. In fact, not knowing that inclusion to the LDC group is voluntary, okay? You can and you cannot. When in 1972 this issue came, Bangabandhu said that what is the benefit? He was told that we will get zero tariff for our jute export. He said, okay, why don't we take it? But there were countries which didn't take it. They said that, oh, we don't want to get into this group of the poor countries. Zimbabwe, Mugabe refused. So inclusion is voluntary, but graduation is mandatory. You meet the 3 criteria, 2 out of 3, and then you are slated for graduation. That's what happened. Okay. So the smart thing will be to prepare. And we have a smooth transition strategy, which is there. And I think that is a very good strategy. The 7 subcommittees have come up with a lot of good suggestions. I think time to implement. And also, the point that I made in a recent op-ed in the Daily Star is that, you see, I was in Nepal. The issue of deferment of graduation is not in the public discourse. They are getting ready for graduation in 2026 November, along with us. Lao PDR, Bangladesh. Bhutan has already graduated in December 2023. So, will Bangladesh be the only other country with war-torn Afghanistan in South Asia, which will be the 2 LDCs remaining in South Asia? Is it acceptable? For me, it is not acceptable. Okay. So I think the smart thing will be to prepare and implement the sustainable LDC, smooth LDC graduation, which could make our LDC graduation sustainable. But we will have to, as I said, do our own homework. First of all, for example, it's good that this government is continuing the negotiations with Japan, to have a free trade agreement or a comprehensive partnership agreement. But these will entail, as I said, a lot of reciprocal initiative. For example, the budget is coming. We will have to gradually do away with, non-customs duty import duties. We have regulatory duties. We do SROs, statutory regulatory ordinances in between, and impose various taxes, etc. We will have to do away with that. Customs duty will have to be the only tariff. So this budget, it has its work, to be done. The emphasis should be on direct taxes. That is also equalizing also, and that is where also the WTO compliance will be ensured. Okay. I was attending the 13th ministerial meeting of the WTO in Abu Dhabi, and there is no appetite for supporting the graduating LDC. So we argued that, well, we will graduate, but keep the preferences for another. We started with 12 years, then we came down to 6 to 9 years, then we came down to 3 years, didn't get anything. The only support that was promised in the ministerial meeting was that no LDC will be taken to the WTO dispute settlement body for 3 years. Okay, so that is the only, after graduation. So that is the only concession that we do. So it is better to get ourselves prepared for the post-LDC life. And the way to do it is to make the transition, which I call from preference-driven competitiveness to productivity and skills-driven competitiveness. That is the way to go forward, because in the post-LDC regime, it will be mainly the competitiveness of our exports, both of goods and of our services. So I think that in view of the upcoming budget, there has to be a lot of attention to, first of all, shifting from our indirect tax-based tax regime to direct tax-based tax regime. And secondly, to also strengthen our negotiating capacities, because we will have to go for various types of trading arrangements. FTA, SEPA, ETCA, whatever the form, we will have to do that. And that will entail a lot of negotiating, capacities and abilities. So this is one. The other thing that Zahid Bhai also mentioned, Murshid Bhai also mentioned, is that, you see, Zahid Bhai said that we are already in the middle income trap, okay? And one of the characteristics of middle income trap is also debt trap, okay? So if you look at our development budget, 100% of our annual development program, ADP, is dependent on debt, either domestic or external. With that type of structure of financing of development activities, is unsustainable. Already, in near-term future, we will have a annual debt repayment of about $6 billion. And mind it, incurring debt is not problem. It is when you use $100 instead of $30, and then you incur the debt burden of $100, but your returns will be from $30. And I did the chapter in the white paper for the mega projects. In one project, for example, 1,800 crore taka project was increased to 18,000 crore taka. Okay, but the feasibility study, and you are students of economics will be knowing, the net present value calculation, the IRR calculation, the ERR calculation, the financial rate of returns calculation remained the same. But the project cost went from 1,800 to 18,000. So what type of returns are guaranteed? So this is a sure way to get into a debt trap. So I think that we will have to do a lot of homework in terms of also cleaning up these. Many of the mega projects, their grace period is coming to an end. And as you know, during the grace period, you pay only interest rate. When the repayment period starts, you pay principal and interest. And that is coming. Rupur, 2026, grace period is ending, repayment period will start. And that's the single largest, $14 billion, okay? So what I'm telling is that external sector is where I think a lot of the ICC semifinals, if not finals, will be played, and we should be ready to take advantage of also the emerging global scenario, along with addressing the challenges that we have. There are also enormous opportunities. I don't have much time. Selim is looking at me. He doesn't like the opportunities. He likes only the challenges. So I will end here. But I think that we will have to do the necessary in order to navigate the challenges and also realize the opportunities which are emerging in the global trading regime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mustafizur Rahman. I think definitely we like the opportunities, and we'll discuss those during the Q&As. I'm quite sure the audience will have questions. Let me invite Professor Sharmin Nilormi. You have a presentation, I think, here. Yes. So Professor Sharmin Nilormi is also a member of the White Paper Committee, and she's Professor of the Department of Economics, Jahangirnagar University.
Good afternoon. So I'm asked to shed lights on some of the aspects of human development that we took in cognizance while we have been working in a White Paper Committee. Now we are the members of defunct White Paper Committee, right? My experience have been after the submission of draft paper, whenever I have an opportunity to talk to a senior government officials, I used to ask them, oh, then you have come up with our reports, right? And they said, oh, Appa, okay, now till now I don't have the opportunity to get into that, but yeah, okay, of course, we will read that. So to my understanding that so far, whoever reads the white paper, or I'm sure the task report, those are some of the spokespersons of past government regime, some of the bloggers, and some of the, academic persons. And beyond that, I'm not sure whether other stakeholders actually get into the things and get into the findings of these reports. So I want to mention some of the core findings, and I want to shed lights on human development aspects, the education, health, gender, disability, and the livability of the country. So I want to start with why this uprising in July, and why we are taking much stress on employment, education, and all that. The first thing is quality. And the foremost trend is our children are going abroad for studies. And is it because the quality compromise, or is it because the livability situation that our children are not, willing to stay back in the country? So while we were exploring data for white paper, I contacted Bangladesh Bank and asked the data, how many student files are kept with Bangladesh Bank, because we all know that when a student goes abroad, they need to have a student file in a bank to transfer their tuition fees and all that. So Bangladesh Bank said that from 2020 till 2024 October, there are about 4,430 student files with them, and about 290 crore Bangladeshi taka was transferred during this period for this student's file. So to whether this is a fact, we took resort on other data. For example, UNESCO said that for 2022-23, 52,799 students traveled overseas from Bangladesh. So as against 4,430 students for 4 years, UNESCO is telling that it is only about 53,000 in 1 year. And the US Open data that tells us in 2023, 17,000 students were enrolled in USA. That was the largest overseas students enrollment ever in US. And these data are very much available in the public domain, and we are complacent with the Bangladesh Bank data that nothing is happening. And we question how this 16 billion illicit financing for every year is being happening, and what is the methodology, and look at the budget size, and we all are ignorant that we, the general people, having our white money, we are also the part of that illicit outflow. And we are making education that the quality education is not there. So quality has always been a high on the agenda, actually. So we looked into the madrasa education, and madrasa education remains always a mystery and marginalized. This is an interesting, graph we came up with. So we have been talking about the alleged nexus of teachers, the political parties, the student leaders, the student politics, defamation of student politics, discredited student politics, and all that. So we looked into the budget of UGC, University Grants Commission, and interestingly, we saw that the development budget actually in 2009, it was like 700 or 800 taka per year. And then it came to actually about 4,000 taka in 2018. And then again it came down, and then again it went up to around 5,000 crore taka. Then what made it happen? Always the non-development budget was higher to development budget. That's not a unique thing in the country. While the non-development budget was 5,000 crore taka, our research budget for all universities were around 200 crore taka. And what made it happen that it actually accidentally went up in 2018 and it accidentally went up in 2014. Is it accidental or is it something to do with we need to focus on? So the political parties, the government spent on universities development project. They approved additional universities, new universities just before the elections in 2018 and in 2024. And for that development budgets, the teachers, the student leaders, the local MP, the local elites, what they have done, they purchased the land first at the local area with very, nominal prices. Then the permission of the universities came through the parliament. And then the DC, they provided the, government land acquisition fees and all that. So they declared that. And then the land acquisition occurred, and all the beneficiaries are from those elite nexus groups. So this is something that we are talking about the alleged nexus of this kind of stakeholders, but I think this is one interesting data that we can connect to. Social derogation of teachers. The only protest that the White Paper Committee on the day of submission of the report we received is from one school teacher. We noted in the report that the primary school teachers, they have been receiving around 19,000 taka per month. And that's pretty much, beyond any livability sort of thing. The only protest he made that we are not making 19,000 taka per month. We are making, for specific reasons, 17,600 taka per month. So it makes a huge difference, significant difference for a school teacher if it is mentioned that 19,000, but they are getting 17,600. So you can see from here that what we are offering for our teachers, and still the teachers are residing on the staying on the roads, and the protests are going on, and we are not in a way making any major reforms in that sector. I'm going for gender issues. We have tried to say that our model of investing on gender, we are producing housewives plus model, meaning we are producing educated women, and without having proper replacement of domesticity, we are just encouraging them to become a housewife with some specific efficiency that they acquired from education. Our employment for women has been declining in urban areas, and we are talking about demographic dividend, and I need to raise the concern that the proportion of women and men involved in agriculture has decreased between 2016 and 2022 for all age groups, except young women aged 15 to 29. So while our young women are taking the employment in the very informal, low-skill, low-rewarding agriculture jobs, what future we are expecting for them, in the future? Let's not think about women, but let's think about the macroeconomy, what we are expecting in the future. Disability, to be sensitive, to become a sensible and inclusive society, you need to have focus on disabled people, on the indigenous communities, on the marginalized groups. And believe me, you are the student, many of you are the students. You go to the Jatiyo Pratibandhi Unnayan Foundation building, the Subarno building, the 14-storied building in Mirpur, and you can find nothing over there except some of the offices. The building were made with the promises, with the help of World Bank money, to establish some rehabilitation for the life cycle approach of disabled person, and there is no services. Last but not the least, when we talk about human development and the livability of the country, we must take note on the environmental aspects, not, if not the climate change issues. For environment, we all know that there is a law that every project needs to have an environmental impact assessment certification from Department of Environment. When we talk to the persons with the Department of Environment, they reported us that all the EIAs are done judicially and religiously and with proper technical means, and everything is at par. Then we got interested and came to know that the famous, the beautiful, fascinating 29.73 kilometer road, the Kisharganj Itna Metamoin Ashtogram road, which the ex-Prime Minister gifted to the ex-president, there was no initial environmental impact assessment done. We had the new tannery estate at Savar, so we determined not to pollute our Buriganga river. Then we completely transferred it to Savar by the side of Dhaleshwari, and believe me, no EIA was done before going over there. So now, instead of polluting Buriganga river, we are on the verge of polluting Dhaleshwari river. Is it that what we wanted? And when the white paper members, we visited outside Dhaka, we consulted, we gone through public consultations. People informed us the high-tech parks were never, functional. They have been built, but nothing is done over there. No business is being taken over there. So I contacted with High-Tech Park Authority, and you can see that such kind of EIA has been done with that, for example, is the environmental impact assessment from the Sylhet site, and the site, they have said that the site is almost 15 feet lower than the Sylhet-Bholaganj road. It usually remains underwater for 3 to 4 months during the rainy season, but also have the possibility of happening flash flood during rainy season. But they built the high-tech park over there. Why? Because high-tech park had nothing to do with water pollution. They only consider the electronic disposal over there, as if the obstruction of water bodies has never been created a problem, for the environment. So this kind of thing, I'm not sure how reform will be taken over, but Salim and everybody was right that it is up to you, the students, who can make all the stakeholders accountable for future reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Niromi. The last point she made, that the high-tech park was built in the low-lying land. So that means you need to have the kind of synergy and the kind of consistency. And in fact, she was very much right that for this white paper committee report, we went out of Dhaka. We had several consultations in important cities and areas where we heard this kind of stories from the important stakeholders. Our final panelist is Dr. Rumana Haq. She is the member of the task force. And Dr. Haq will be talking on the health sector primarily, but I'm quite sure she will also be touching on some other issues too.
I take the opportunity to thank Sanim for inviting me to this important session and especially giving me the opportunity to talk about health sector. We know that the health sector has been neglected for long, and in terms of budgetary allocation, in terms of policy and practice. So it's really encouraging to see that both the white paper and the task force had chapters on health and came up with number of recommendations. I will try to highlight a few challenges and some recommendations, mainly coming from the task force. Just to set the context, that we know the health sector in Bangladesh was successful in achieving the Millennium Development Goals, and those we considered as the low-hanging fruit. But achieving universal health coverage, that means increasing the service coverage, all types of service to the entire population in a way that it doesn't create any pressure on the population in terms of financial affordability. It's a big challenge. And this needs a shift from the way we are managing the health sector, the way we are delivering the services, financing, equipment, medicine, governance. So that shift is really critical, and sometimes we believe that we need a complete rehauling of the health sector. However, just to mention that our task in the task force committee was, as mentioned earlier, to identify a few low-hanging fruits, which was difficult, but we tried. And I'm happy to say that in the task force report, we repeatedly tried to emphasize that health sector needs greater investment, and we need to shift our idea of thinking health sector as very clinical, that when we get sick and we get for treatment. Rather, it should be a life course approach, and we have to invest in the health sector so that we get a better productive workforce, and the productivity increases, and health sector investment can contribute in enhancing our GDP as well. And we are in a position that majority of the population now, in the productive age, young. So investing in health is really important, and it will create value for money for the country. However, we have to also consider the population are aging, and after 15 years, maybe the population dynamics will change. There are emerging issues, diseases like COVID-19. This creates huge pressure on the economy, including the health sector. There is increasing burden of non-communicable disease, that every household has a diabetic patient, hypertensive patient, and that increases the healthcare cost, not for a certain period like COVID, but for entire lifetime. And there is increasing demand for healthcare because we know that what's going on abroad, and that creates some sort of pressure, from the demand side, that we want these, we want that. So government has to cater to that need of the population as well. There are innovation going on, so we need more innovation in the health sector as well. So a few challenges I will highlight from the task force report. I encourage you to go to the website and download and read that because in maybe 12 minutes left, I can't cover everything, but I will pick a few points. The first is health financing. Health sector received around 5% of the national budget, and that remained stagnant for many years. Even during COVID, we expected that the budget allocation will go high, but it never happened. Whatever budget we received, we used that inefficiently. And this is an allegation for the health sector that we cannot spend the entire budget. So a large amount remains unspent. And Ministry of Finance says that, why are you asking for more money when you cannot spend the allocated money? But the counter argument is that there are some systemic issues. You need to identify those and solve and allocate more money, but use that more efficiently. So we have to identify the bottlenecks, that why health sector cannot use the allocated money, and try to solve that rather than saying that, okay, you can't spend money, so 5% is fine. So we have to change that thinking process. As the allocation from the government is low, people has to go to the private sector as well, and that is increasing the out-of-pocket health expenditure. So lots of is creating pressure on the population, which also increases the catastrophic health expenditure. Many people have to sell their assets just to access the healthcare, especially as I said, that non-communicable disease, cancer patient, and other chronic conditions. And there is low level of health insurance in the country, so that's why we don't have prepayments. Out-of-pocket health expenditure is quite high, and it is around 70% now in the country. Another dimension is human resources in the health sector. There is chronic shortage of health personnel. If we consider the Directorate General of Health Services, Family Planning, and Nursing and Midwifery, this just giving the three main service delivery units, from 10% to 49%, 50% across all the grades. So how can you provide quality care when you have such shortage of healthcare personnel? And just to mention that we have really chronic shortage of mental health professionals. Now mental health is coming a big challenge, but we only have a few mental health specialists. So we need to think that we have allocated sanctioned posts, but the vacancy is so high that it creates lots of burden of the existing health workforce at all the level. And just again to remind ourselves that it is not only the doctor and that we are relying on. Nurses and other midwives and other support staff, allied health workforce, those are also really important, and the vacancy at that level is quite high. So we need to look into that as well. And some other factors in terms of the human resources is that there's, the way the salary is paid. It's not only health sector, it's also the education sector and everywhere. But that is like every month we get the same salary, so it's not related to the performance. So they are less motivated, there is less incentive to do something better. And one of the challenge in the health sector is that the public financial management, it's so important to ensure efficiency of resource use and also resource allocation as well. But those who are providing healthcare, they have limited understanding of the overall planning, budgeting, audit. So now there are 8,500 audit objections lying down. So they can't work, they can't move ahead with this limited capacity of public financial management and knowledge. Medicine price is really high, and especially for those, for the chronic conditions, and that is creating burden and also increasing out-of-pocket health expenditure. If we look into the equipments in the government sector, non-functional, even the basic X-ray machines and other equipments are not working, so people have to go to the private sector, again increasing the out-of-pocket health expenditure. So all these high price and also non-functional equipment leads to suboptimal quality of care. So quality of care is really low, and service coverage is also low. So all the services in the benefit package cannot be delivered with this limited medicine and other non-functional equipment. Urban primary healthcare is really neglected. The entire health infrastructure is developed to considering the rural sector. So urban primary healthcare is under Ministry of Local Government, limited budget, limited priority. Health is not their agenda. So that is a neglected area we really have to think of. There is no structured referral. We can go to a very senior professor just for coughing and running nose. That's not needed. They can be served at the primary healthcare level if we have a structured referral system. So we can bypass and turn on anywhere. So that's why it's also very difficult to plan. Though we have historical data, for the hospital level, but that's not enough. Governance and leadership, again, a huge challenge, not only for the health sector, for the entire system, but just to say that there is a huge private sector in the country, but they are mostly unregulated. They are not accredited in terms of their quality. There is non-coordination in Ministry of Health and local government. As just mentioned, local government is responsible for providing primary healthcare in the urban areas. And there is no mechanism to do some sort of public-private partnership or strategic purchasing. So where government cannot provide the services, how to buy the services from the private sector. So it's not very easy, and there are lack of mechanism or proper system in place so that it can be done easily. Just to give an idea that in district hospital, Upazila Health Complex, even NGO sector, private sector, the Bangladesh Health Facility Survey mentions that the basic equipments, X-ray machine, all these are not available. So this is the bar shows the percentage of hospitals where these basic equipments are available, so rest are not. So none of the hospitals, even any sector, have 100% basic equipment. So this is really something we need to consider. Now, in my last 4 minutes, maybe I will highlight a few recommendations. So in the task force, we mentioned that of course, long-term commitments from the government is really important. Always firefighting, some other also mentioned, and ad hoc planning, it will not work. It needs long-term planning and commitment. However, short-term wins are also very important to gain the trust of the public, of the general population. And the economic growth does not necessarily mean that resource will be transferred to the health sector. So that needs more, big push from the sector, and appropriate measures need to be taken. So we just highlighted a few immediate to short-term strategies, that there is an essential service package in the Ministry of Health which defines which tier, like from the community level to the district and tertiary level hospital, what services will be provided by the government at free of cost. That needs to be updated considering the current health scenario and also urban health as well. The list of essential medicine that government provides at free of cost, that is very limited. Considering the current context, again, this is immediate. They can do it anytime. So this is the opportunity, maybe government can look into this. So if the list of essential medicine that is reviewed, then more budget, that unspent money that we can't spend every year, that can go here and we can buy the medicine. And that can go to the below poverty line population. We really emphasized on taking one tertiary hospital as a model hospital and all the recommendations to test in that model hospital and learn the lesson and replicate in other. And similar for the primary healthcare, that take one sub-district or district and strengthen the primary healthcare, use all these recommendations and try to see that how that model or pilot primary healthcare system works. And we have to strengthen the urban primary healthcare as well. A behavioral change communication, not only the clinical and service provision, but also preventive and promotive care. That's really important. It's really important that public financial management capacity is developed. Digitalization, use of technology, data management, these are also very important. The last point I will highlight is that the 5-year health sector plan that was supposed to start from January this year, that has been halted and that has not been approved yet. So either you start this or develop a phase-out plan. Many programs are suffering just because no decision is taken. So this needs to be solved very soon. And of course, we need to encourage foreign direct investment for the tertiary care mainly, so that foreign investors can come and invest in the sector. I will not go into the medium to long-term strategies. What can be done in the long term? Government has to take some of these initiatives. One is to reform the institutions and ensure that the governance is strengthened, and some of the policies that needs to be reviewed. So government can definitely take the initiative and do the medium to long-term implementation of those. I again thank Sanem for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. I think now it's a question answer time, and I request the volunteers, please arrange the chairs here on the dais. Volunteer RQ9. I will do that. Don't worry. May I request the panelists to please come to the stage? Thank you. I think we need to now hear from the audience because you have heard some very important issues which have been discussed through these presentations by the five distinguished panelists. So the floor is open now. Who wants to raise question? Okay, I can see the hand. First, Dr. Nahid Sattar, and then I will come. Yes, please. I would really like to have more larger participation from the audience so that if you can make your intervention brief.
Thank you, sir. This is Nahid Sattar from Bangladesh Agriculture University. And I think Dr. K.S. Murshid, sir, at the end of his talk mentioned that whatever the macroeconomic situation is, we cannot be really satisfied unless there is a sufficient supply of food and so on, the food and agricultural stability. So my question in that regard is, I don't really see because of all this economic and political instability in terms of food production, any new vulnerability that was not there. But I do see a lot of new vulnerabilities and challenges in the supply chain, like whether it's in the middle portion of the supply chain because of all the instability of what can happen, what may not happen. And in the task force report, I do see that there are some points regarding setting up cold storages and logistics development, but I do not see too much details of a plan to combat that sort of situation. Like back in last September, we see prices really rising. Now it's comparatively lower because of the time of the year and the supply of crops. So, but are there any strategies to deal with such challenges in agriculture and food supply? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Satta. We'll come to the panelists, but let's collect some more questions. Okay, this side. Yes, I think you can have the microphone. If you can direct your question to any of the panelists and you can name the panelists.
Sure, sir.
Yes, it's okay. It's working.
Thank you for the insightful presentation. So my question is from Professor Rahman, sir. Sir, one suggestion that was the signing free trade agreement or preferential trade agreement with other countries. And we know that such kind of agreement may causes trade creation or it might cause trade diversion as well. So as the do you think as the trade diversion effect is higher than the trade creation effect, it may not reduce the productivity of the country or the sectors? This one question. We also know that firms or business are strongly heterogeneous in each and every countries. So in such circumstances, this free trade agreement or preferential trade agreement may give the opportunity to some low productive firms in these kind of agreement may exit some high productivity from the sector or from the economy. How the country should deal in such circumstances, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. He's from Afghanistan. He presented a paper during this conference. Yes, you should have introduced. But anyways, don't worry. Okay, so any female participant Yes, please.
Thank you so much. I'm Paramita, currently studying in third year, University of Dhaka, Department of Economics. So my question is regarding that there has been a lot of policy suggestion on different fields and sectors. So are there any specific structures that can allow the integration of all this that can that the government or the other institutions who are in the bureaucracy or who have that capacity of driving the changes, that they can focus on this one particular structure that can allow all the sectors to flourish better? And the second question is, you spoke about the demand side pressure. I feel like the demand side pressure from the people are already there, but it's not very well targeted. So we already have demand problems, but we do not know how to systematically approach the existing bodies. So what are the advice towards the young generation that how can we do this systematically in a way that we are heard properly? So
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you. Here, the microphone here, please. Probably the first question was directed to Murshid Bhai because the task force report of the governance
Hello.
chapter, he authored that chapter. Yes.
Hello, I'm Mohammad Asim Hossain from the Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. My first question is directed to Dr. Romana Haq. I wanted some more clarification on the role of FDI in the health sector, as we can intuitively say that foreign investment might strengthen the private sector, which in turn might increase the out-of-pocket expenditure. And my second question is that I've had the privilege to read both the papers, but due to some jargons, I was directed to the reviews in particular. So what are the steps? I know that it might be out of your capacity to promote these reports and everything. It is the role of the government or the authority. But are there any measures taken by you so that the general people, the public, can more understand these types of reports and your findings, so that the general dissemination of this information can really help build the narrative? It can really push the incentive for better reform, for better accountability. So what are the steps that have been taken or that you are planning to take regarding the promotion of these reports and findings?
Thank you. Just for your information, you are here in that session for this particular reason. This session is dedicated to, this is actually for dissemination, and we are sharing our information. And on 18 January, the White Paper Committee, they organized a big event in Chinmoitri Sammelan, where whole day, we tried to, the members of the White Paper Committee, we presented our findings. Tomorrow and day after, in the same room, there will be a 2-day event on this task force, dissemination of the task force. So I think definitely we want to have much larger dissemination, of course. But thank you very much for your very important question. Any hands? Any further? Okay. Yes. How can I first? Yes, Ramesh. Yes, Dr. Ramesh from Nepal.
Hello, namaste everyone. I'm Ramesh from Nepal. I'm reader at the Central Department of Economics of Tribhuvan University. My question is very simple. Anyone can answer. Probably Salim also can answer this question, right? If we go and have a look at the data of Bangladesh, the growth episode has been tremendous, right? Almost double per capita GDP within 10 years. However, there are some bad sectors as well. It seems that the growth did not did not go through the inclusive nature. That may be the problem. But still, if we look at the micro level and every sector, it seems difficult now. Then what could be the right answer for this one? I'm looking the answer for that one. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this question is for Dr. Jahid Hossain. So he wrote that macro chapter, several chapters in the white paper, and especially on the growth narrative. I think he's the right person to answer or emphasize on that. I saw the hands of Hilal Bhai. Yes, please. Professor Hilaluddin.
Oh, thank you. Hello, Ahmed, a retired academic and policy wonk, but a passionate economist and an observer. it's more of an observation rather than a question, but you can pick up and answer. So I heard about 10 times you suggested low-hanging fruits, which is understandable because in the exuberance, public exuberance of and elevated expectations, it's important to deliver. And so low-hanging fruits is easy to deliver. But at the same time, I would like to sort of change the narrative, saying high impact as well. So whatever you pick up, like health is one area where it can have impact very broadly. So rather than 34, all can be delivered, but high impact one could be prioritized. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, for a lasting legacy, I would rather suggest do some process innovation and institutional innovation, which will have much lasting impact, given the sort of a sense of legitimacy or social licensing and all that. I think if you can innovate in terms of process of how to develop a reform and execute it, that can have a lasting effect. Subsequent government probably wouldn't forget about the benefits of that process. And when I say process innovation, it means you set the right agenda, engage the stakeholders early in the process, consult all that, not just negotiate with some vested interest, and then have a public debate on that. That's the way you were doing it. So that process innovation, it has to be articulated. It's very important. And also institutional innovation. I know you're talking about accountability and all sorts of things, but there must be an institution that will look after this accountability issue. And I have written something on reforming a planning commission. It's sitting there doing planning, which is a out-of-date exercise, it's a worthless exercise, to be honest. You can turn this into a regulatory reform agenda and a policy unit, and it is well set up to undertake that. So that kind of industry innovation could be one. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hill. I think we take your points as kind of suggestions and recommendations. Any other hand in the back? Yes, please.
Thank you for the opportunity. This is Sahamuddin Shishir from Jahangirnagar University. I'm a third-year economics student. My question is regarding IMF. As we know, and I have seen experts to say that IMF loans is something harmful, or it's leading, economic crisis sometimes. So, and we also know that the loan we get from IMF is less than the remittance we are getting nowadays. And the NDB of BRICS introduces a concept of de-dollarization. So in spite all of these things, why countries running after the loans of IMFs? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other hand? We have exhausted. Okay, so now I come back to the panelists. I think each panelist, at least they have got at least one question. So I start with Murshid Bhai, Dr. K.S. Murshid.
Hello. Thank you for the very interesting questions. Prothame, there was this talk about agriculture and a strategy. And our approach really was to identify some of the existing potential that already we can identify quite easily. And this relates to technology and relates to adoption of newer varieties of different crops. It relates to available technologies that ought to be adopted much more quickly than they are for various reasons, including reasons of incentive. One very good example is the policy with regard to the two-wheel tractors. And what the government has done is said that we are going to try and promote two-wheel tractors in backward regions. Now, as it happens, in the backward regions of the country, there is no demand for two-wheel tractors, right? And so this policy, we thought, this is easy to fix. You don't have this kind of a policy. You just allow two-wheel tractors to be incentivized all across the country, and let it go to the places where the demand is the highest. So that kind of things that you could do quite easily in terms of policies. But the main thing is to lower cost of these technologies, And the second most important thing is to make these, the knowledge and the information available. So essentially what we tried to do was say, okay, so if you for example, adopt AWD irrigation, or if you use urea-coated, neem-coated fertilizers, these are already there. These have been proven to be cost-effective, saves you money, increases your crop. These are the easy things to do. So those are the things that we focused on, rather than longer-term issues with regard to, creating warehouses and storage and so on. Those are much more complex, needs a lot of money, and it's not easy to incentivize. So that's the response to agriculture. On the demand side, the question on the demand side for the reforms, I think we were lucky in a way that because the interim government, I mean, if you remember, the caretaker governments used to be only for 3 months. So they didn't really have enough time to do any reforms. And this was, I think, the problem with the first task force report led by Professor Rahman Subhan. I mean, he was the advisor. He created a demand for a task force, but he didn't stay there long enough to implement any of those things. And the next government didn't do anything about it. Here we have a different opportunity. We have a demand, and we have a bit of time, and there is an opportunity here for the interim government to undertake some reforms, take on some initiatives. So this is very important. Okay, the dissemination thing is extremely important, and we are doing this. You already heard that we are having a 2-day conference tomorrow and day after, but that cannot also be the end of the story. This has to be taken up by others. I mean, our work actually for most practical purposes is finished. Now, our stakeholders must take this up. FDI in health is extremely important, although it's for the tertiary sector, but it's going to save us foreign exchange, where so many Bangladeshis go abroad for health. This, in fact, is a low-hanging fruit. I mean, I know there's a lot of satire about low-hanging fruit in the community, but the fact is there are some things that are easier to do than others. And should we set ourselves up for the most difficult, most complex, and then fail? Or should we try to take on things that are easier to do, maybe not as much of a high impact as Professor Hilal would like, but then deliver that? Because to date, we have not delivered very much. We only talked. Okay.
Thank you, Jahid Bhai. Dr. Jahid Hassan.
Thank you. Let me address the question on growth. I think the Bangladesh growth experience has 2 problems. One is a quantity problem, and the other is a quality problem. The quantity problem was there were a lot of questions when, in the decade of the 2010s, the GDP growth was rapidly rising about the veracity of those growth numbers. So in the white paper, we tried to assess the credibility, and we used an econometric model based on an international panel data set to find out how much of the reported growth might be overstated. And our conclusion was that from fiscal 09 to fiscal 19, and the reported growth averaged 7%, the model-based growth was 4.2%. So there was very large overstatement. And this is corroborated by other growth-related evidence that we have in the literature. Now, 4.2% growth is not great, but it's not bad either. When GDP doubles in every generation at that rate. So then the question arises that, okay, so what about inclusivity? And if you look at the labor market data in Bangladesh, then you see that particularly in the last half of the 2010s, the labor market were not showing any response to growth. I mean, the employment in manufacturing, in fact, declined in 2022 relative to 2016. So if growth doesn't come with generation of good jobs, then how is it going to trickle down to the common people? Because they have only one thing to sell, which is their labor. Right? And if that's not demanded in the market, but growth is happening, then we also see evidence of that in the inequality data. The income Gini coefficient has been increasing, the wealth inequalities have been increasing. So whatever growth we had was not well distributed. So that's your question. I want to make one last comment on the question that we had on whether there is a structure in the government to synthesize the findings. I hate to say that, but I think we need something like a DOGE in and somebody like Elon Musk who is going to exit where the inefficiencies are. Okay, thank you.
Professor Mustafizur Rahman.
Thank you, Salim. Before I go to the second question, which was put by our Afghan friend, with regard to what Murshid Bhai was telling about the vulnerabilities, the question that was put by Dr. Nahid Sattar, I think we should be very careful with regard to the Boro season, which is coming. I can foresee that there could be a shortage of fertilizer because of the scant gas supply to our fertilizer factories, like the Polish fertilizer factory. So they are not being able to produce the fertilizer. So there could be some shortage which the interim government will have to very carefully consider and if required import. With regard to the second question, yes, of course, from economic theory, we know that there could be, when we go for a free trade agreement type of arrangement, there could be trade creation and trade diversion, and we can find out what is the balance from various models, GTEP model, etc. So we can find that out. But that's a static analysis, okay? When we talk about FTA, currently no one talks about mere FTA, just bringing down the tariff rates. The issue now is of more of nature of a comprehensive economic partnership agreements, where you also include trade facilitation, you include connectivities, people-to-people connectivities, trade connectivities, investment connectivities, logistics connectivity, transport connectivities. So if you can have those, in the dynamic sense, you can change those possibilities of trade diversion or, being higher than trade creation. So one will have to look at it from a more a dynamic perspective, and also do the other things. Just reducing the tariffs in a static sense will not do the matter. I had another question with regard to dissemination. Already our media friends have extensively covered some of the seminars that we had. So that is one. The other thing that I would like to say is that as we speak, the white paper chapters are being translated in popular Bangla. So hopefully that will come soon, and that will also help us with our dissemination of the white paper. I don't know, but I saw that the task force reports were being presented in Prothoma. I think it came out, in successive numbers. So that is also a great way of public broader dissemination of our reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rahman. Professor Haq, Rumana Haq.
Thank you. The question on foreign direct investment already touched upon, but I will just briefly add that in any way there is a huge private sector in the country. In addition to that, people are going abroad for seeking healthcare. So there are lots of outflow of our scarce resources. So if we can ensure that the foreign direct investment they are in the tertiary sector, healthcare sector, then some of these scarce foreign currency can be saved. Theoretically, if there are more investment in this private sector, the competition will go up and the price will go down, and there will be improvement in the quality. But of course, if we want to achieve all these, there should be governance and stewardship there from the government side to ensure these. At the same time, I would like to highlight that it's a human right also to have lots of choice for accessing care. So from that perspective, I think we should not discourage the FDI in the health sector. The last point, I'll hand over.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You want to?
Yes.
Any other point?
No, this is the last point is that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. Now I just forgot what I was trying to say. But from the human side, at the same time, I mean, we always say that there should be prepayment mechanism, the health insurance. So we need the private sector ready for that. And if the cost goes down for all these, then government can also procure or strategically purchase the health from the private sector. So the out-of-pocket health expenditures that you are referring to, so government can always cross-subsidize in some other way. So that's I wanted to add.
Can we take this discussion in the tea break so that, because there is another session after that. But we want to take this discussion in the tea break. Now, Professor Nilormi, please.
I don't have any question to respond to directly, but the thing is, human development, we cannot think of its enhancement having a certificate without being sat for the examination. So there can be popular demands, there can be pressures, but we need to stand with what we need to do and withstand with the protest, withstand with what we think we need to do. Having said that, having alarmingly increased violence in the cyberspace, in the public space for women and other persons, security has come up with a great threat nowadays, and I think it needs to be resolved very soon. Other than that, any reform will not take us to anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, please.
The question that I have for Zahid is that, I mean, as the leading economist of the country, and because we talked about the debt trap that we're already facing, now we already are in a debt trap, because I remember having this discussion with the ADB team. And they were saying that, yeah, at that point, we were all quite gung-ho about, because everybody was coming to Dhaka and promising us things. You will have noticed by now that that tendency has now dwindled. Huh? Yeah, at that point, we thought that everybody would be very generous and give us lots of money and so on and so forth. So that, I don't know whether I'm detecting a slight decline in that trend or not. But the point at that time that was raised, and still valid, was that you are already over-indebted. And it's very difficult for you to actually service the debt that you already have. So how can other institutions, multilateral agencies, bilateral agencies, come and give you more money, and on what basis? So this is the dilemma, I think, that we face, and I'd like to ask Zahid to respond.
I mean, what's the question? I think the concern that Murshid Bhai is raising is, will we be able to get new money, given that we already have a large amount of debt, and will that be enough to service the debt and then leave some for us to invest? And I think, so we have to go back to why we have reached this position where we are concerned about our ability to service the debt. I mean, if the money was used productively, if we got value for money. Now, Mustafiz gave you the most stark example where an 1,800 crore taka project turned into 18,000 crore taka. So if we keep financing that kind of project, then we are doomed forever. So I think the focus should be on getting value for money for the debt, and is the institutions which provide the money cannot escape responsibility for not getting value for money. And the best example we currently is the Rupsha power plant, which was ADB financed, knowing that there is no gas supply nearby. So we spent millions of dollars building a very modern plant, which is now sitting idle. But we have to pay the debt service. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think, we are so grateful on behalf of SANEM to this distinguished panelist. The whole objective was to, I think, one of our students from Department of Economics, he's a first-year student, he raised that issue, how we are disseminating the findings from white paper and task force. We have shared with you that we already started, and media has also picked up, but objective of this session was also to bring in front of you the evident personalities who worked in these two committees and share their experiences. So I hope that a part of this objective was fulfilled. Please interact with us and to know more. And as I said in my intervention, that it would be great if you initiate discussion within yourself, and probably you can invite any one of us, we can talk more about this. With this, I'd like to conclude this session, thanking once again our esteemed panelists. We'll break for 10 minutes for the next session. There's a tea outside.